This edition of Monocle on Saturday was first broadcast on the 8th of June 2024. Hello, I'm Georgina Godwin, broadcasting to you live from Midori House in London. This is Monocle on Saturday. Coming up on today's programme, we'll have a look through the week's news and culture with Lijia Zhang, who is a writer, a social commentator and a public speaker. Then Kate Mosse, the founding director of the Women's Prize, gives us a preview of their live event celebrating talented women in literature. And finally, we find out about the initiative bringing books to food banks. That's all ahead here on Monocle on Saturday. First though, here's the news. Israel bombarded central and southern areas of Gaza again on Friday, killing at least 28 Palestinians, and tank forces advanced to the western edges of Rafah. US-backed Qatari and Egyptian mediators have been trying to facilitate a ceasefire, but sources close to the talks said there are still no signs of a breakthrough. Denmark's Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen was assaulted by a man in central Copenhagen yesterday. The assailant was arrested and the PM appeared physically unharmed. The assault comes 2 days before Danes head to the polls in the EU elections. 3 weeks ago, Slovakia's Prime Minister Robert Fico was seriously injured in an assassination attempt. And retired astronaut William Anders, who was one of the first 3 humans to orbit the moon, capturing the famed Earthrise photo during NASA's Apollo 8 mission in 1968, died on Friday in the crash of a small aeroplane in Washington state. He was 90. NASA chief Bill Nelson paid tribute to Anders with a post of the iconic image of Earth rising over the lunar horizon, saying the former Air Force pilot offered to humanity among the deepest of gifts an astronaut can give. And that's your Monocle Radio News. Hello and welcome to Monocle on Saturday. Now, I'm delighted to say I'm joined in the studio by the writer, social commentator and public speaker, Lijia Zhang. Now, you're going to correct my pronunciation of that. You taught me how to say it and I practiced it for hours.
You did it very well, yeah.
Thank you so much for coming in. We first met when we were both panellists on somebody else's show for some other station. And in fact, we were together again last night. It was the opening of Jaipur in London, the Jaipur Literature Festival in London. Wasn't it a lovely event?
Yeah, it was lovely, yes. I became a literature festival junkie.
And if you are interested in that, it's on at the British Library all weekend, all today, all tomorrow. Lots of fantastic Indian and British and American authors. John Valiant, who wrote that wonderful book, Fire Weather, I think is going to be there. And I'm interviewing Vikas Swaroop, who you might know as the author of the original book that sparked the film Slumdog Millionaire. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Elif Shafak there also talking about her new book, There Are Rivers in the Sky. You have written a book, though, and it's about, well, you've written a few, but there's one that is about your life. And I just want for you to tell us briefly, because you fascinating upbringing.
I wrote a memoir which did better than I ever dreamed of. It's called Socialism is Great. It's not about socialism. It's all about me. About my... I spent 10 years at a factory as a basic labor at a missile factory. When I was 16, I was taken out of school and put to work. And my factory produced intercontinental missiles that were capable of reaching North America.
Wow.
But I hated my life there, so I taught myself English as the escape route. And learning English has effectively changed my life.
Extraordinary. Now, while you were at the factory, you were very involved, really politically, weren't you? And this is now during the time of Tiananmen Square. And of course, we've been having all of this in the headlines this week because it's been the 35th anniversary of Tiananmen. Tell us about your involvement there.
Right. So back in 1989, something extraordinary happened. A pro-democracy movement happened. Thousands of students started in Beijing. Thousands of students marched the street demanding greater human rights, greater freedom. And that grew to be a nationwide movement. And in the very end of May, I was still in Nanjing. I organized a biggest protester by workers in support the democratic movement because I believed individual could make a difference. And then unfortunately on June 4th, before dawn, at the darkest hour, Tiananmen, the tanks rode to Tiananmen and the People's Liberation Army opened fire to people. Nobody knew how many people died, maybe a few hundred, but it was shocking.
Absolutely shocking. And that's shut down your protest at the factory too.
Exactly. And the Tiananmen 1989 was very much a watershed moment. And people went to the street to protest, not only because they wanted democracy, human rights, but also they were not happy with their lives. They lost restriction. So ever since then, the government granted people more personal freedom, meanwhile cracked down on political freedom. So, and ever since then, June 4th has always been commemorated, not in mainland China, but elsewhere. But since Xi Jinping came to power, he tightened the control. He was obsessed with the collapse of the Soviet Union. He was determined that this is not going to happen in China. So he wanted control. He introduced national security law. He tightened. People now have less freedom compared to before. So, for example, before in Hong Kong, there was always a vigil and such things people used to commemorate the event. Now, this year, very little happened. This is the commemoration this year was more muted than ever before because of the control.
And of course, that's the point that most of the papers were picking up on about how China's kind of paranoia is giving this big security clampdown and people just don't talk about Tiananmen.
Yes. Exactly.
I wonder if people talk about Ukraine in China, how important that is to people there, and indeed how involved China is with this. There's a piece in the papers talking about Vladimir Zelensky, of course, the leader of Ukraine, accusing Russia and China of undermining a peace summit.
Yeah, this is a very much a hot topic in China. China's stance on the issue is quite interesting. China claims to be neutral. And China claims that it does not take any side, but people laughingly call it pro-Russia neutrality. China has not condemned Putin's invasion of Ukraine. I think China probably hasn't supplied weapon, but they may have supplied some of the parts. But the trade between Russia and China soared. Last year, for example, the trade value was $240 billion US dollars. So at least China kind of prompted up, this trade kept Russia going and eased the sanction by the West. So anyway, China and Russia got together, but had a lot to do with America because both China and Russia felt they have been mistreated by the United States. Yeah.
As does North Korea, of course. You can lump that in. And what's been happening with the so-called poo balloons from North Korea it is funny, actually. Now, you've been to both North and South Korea, haven't you?
Yes, the news came out just this week, also last week. Last week, the North Koreans sent about 1,000 balloons to the south containing rubbish, cigarette butts, and apparently poo. So it's been referred as the poo balloons. So this week, in retaliation, some North Korean defectors sent 10 large balloons containing goodies, USB, K-pop, US dollars, and propaganda material critical of Kim Jong-un to North Korea.
Extraordinary. Tell us a little bit about North Korea. I mean, what your impression of it was when you were there.
Yeah, I was just laughing at it. This is just so funny because also tell you, something really true. It was funny, but also, indicates that North Korea is a regime that is so unpredictable. Unpredictable. I went to North Korea in 1993 as the first group of organized tour by foreigners. You couldn't just turn up like you are come to UK. You have to go through a tour operator. And at that time, one of my friends was working in North Korea. And with coordination with the authority, I went there, and also we went to the border, the
CMZ,
and also went to see the mass game show. It was very impressive in the celebration of the liberation of the fatherland. But we were not supposed to go out, but I went out on my own, and I went to the shops. There were just hardly anything in the shelves, just a few pickles.
Wow.
And I just said, that was 1993. And I thought, I was more grateful to Deng Xiaoping, who, opened China, introduced economic reform. I doubt the same thing is going to happen to North Korea anytime soon.
North Korea, you've been to South Korea, you're a world traveller. You've also been to Tibet. And of course, we know now that the Dalai Lama is going to the US.
For the knee treatment.
For a knee treatment. Lucky man, I've been waiting for knee treatment for years.
You're not holy enough, maybe. You should wait a bit more.
You have to be practically a living saint to get. Oh, he is, right. But tell us about your visit to Tibet and your meeting with His Holiness. Do you call him His Holiness? With the Dalai Lama.
Yes. Well, in China, however, most people call him His Holiness Dalai Lama, but in China, he's known as the wolf dressed in monk's robe.
Extraordinary.
In China, he's regarded as a dangerous separatist.
Mm.
So he is a Tibetan spiritual leader, and he left Tibet for India in 1959 after a failed uprising. So that's why he had been living. And China saw him as, not on the good book. So they opposed any interaction between him and foreign states. So China already made some noise opposing his trip to the United States.
Where presumably he's having, knee replacements?
Yeah.
It looks like. He's 88.
Yeah.
Did you find him very serene when you met him?
He is the most charming man. I had a big trip. I've been to different pockets of Tibet and Tibetan parts in Tibet, autonomous region. Listen. I guess that's the issue, and some Tibetans feel there's no real autonomy. But anyway, I went to a few times, and in 1992, I traveled for 2 months in Tibet. And when I returned, it just happened that His Holiness went to give a speech at Oxford Union. So I went with my ex-husband to see him, and we got a hada, this white scarf as a show of respect. We could present to him. And we met him, we shook hands with him. He was charming, and half the things he said I didn't understand, didn't know. Therefore, but anyway, he's charming. You just kind of in awe with him when you are there. Yeah. Anyway, so when we met him, my ex-husband was in tears because we gave him the hada, the scarf, and he took it and blessed it and gave back to Callum, my ex-husband. He was in tears.
Oh. But what a meaningful and profound experience it sounds.
Yes, and I just a huge tricky issue. What's going to happen when he's no longer with us?
Yes. Yeah. I want to talk a little bit more about your books now.
Please.
So the first one, which was your memoir, and
the first one was actually a history book I co-authored with my ex.
Yeah. And that was History of China.
Yes, China Remembers, yes.
Yeah.
Oral history, yeah.
And then your memoir?
My memoir, yes. It did better than I ever dreamed, and now published in 11 countries.
And it's available here in Britain?
Yes, Amazon, yes. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah.
It's not about socialism, I have to tell people. It's about me, with plenty of juicy details.
Well, Lijia, thank you so much for coming on to talk to us. That's just been absolutely fascinating. I hope you'll be back on Monocle Radio very soon.
Anytime.
That's Lijia Zhang, and we'll take a short break.
The Menu, bringing you Monocle's recipe for the best in drinking and dining. We make entertaining a doddle.
It's incredibly easy to make.
With expert opinions.
You can use fish fillets, which you grill in the oven or pan fry.
A bit of seasoning.
Lots of lime, a lot of cracked pepper, and a bit of good olive oil.
And plenty of spice.
And then you cook it in caraway and 7 spice.
As well as something sweet.
Then you take a big pot of mascarpone and spoon it into your egg yolk.
And maybe even a little bit nuts.
You take it out, you top it with some pine nuts, and you're good to go.
It's a recipe that's guaranteed to impress.
It's slightly controversial, but it's the one thing that has surprised the most people when they eat it.
Premiering live every Friday at 2000 London time, midday in Los Angeles, or downloadable wherever you get your podcasts.
Now, recent data showed that 1 in 12 children in the UK do not own any books, and that over 2 million people in the UK rely on food banks. Well, a new charity, Bookbanks, aims to change that. Joining me now in the studio to tell us more is the charity's founder, Emily Rhodes. Welcome, Emily.
Hi, Georgina. It's so lovely to be here.
Well, it's great to have you back because, of course, you've been on before. You've been out here as a representative of Daunts, where you used to work a million years ago. And you also came to speak to us about your walking book club. Can we start with that? Tell us more.
Of course. Well, Emily's Walking Book Club I began just over a decade ago. And we walk and talk on Hampstead Heath about books. Well, that's how it began. We also now walk and talk in Regent's Park, and we have a really strong online community too. As you've sort of indicated, I have spent my life immersed in the world of books, whether that's professionally as a bookseller or in the Walking Book Club, or as a child. I always loved reading, studied English at university. And I think what I've only come to realise in the last decade or so, partly through Emily's Walking Book Club and also through Daunts and now through Bookbanks, is that books, as well as being such a powerful source of inspiration and a wonderful thing to be alone with, they're a really powerful tool for bringing people together. And you can really build and grow communities through books.
I've often wondered how your Walking Book Club works, because you can't hear everybody at the same time, can you?
No, well, wonderfully, you can all talk at once. So we do, we gather and stand, and I will maybe read a bit out and ask a question for people to explore. But then we sort of set off. And as we walk, we naturally split into smaller groups of 2, 3, 4. So there might be 50 of us on the walk, but you won't all be talking 50 people to each other. That will, you'll find a pair, a partner, and you walk along until we have the next stop. We regroup and then set off again, talking to someone else, I hope.
And what sort of books are they? Do they reflect the walks? Are they about nature or?
Oh, yeah, good question. So I decided when I was working in a bookshop that there was a huge amount telling us to read new books, reviews, which I also do, but there was very little to flag the kind of hidden gems, the really good books that had slightly dropped off the radar because they weren't new anymore, they weren't just out in paperback. And I felt it was kind of my duty as someone who loved great books to try and help people find those books. So with the Walking Book Club, I really try and find voices that you might not otherwise hear. So as a result, they're often in translation, or maybe written by women or by a writer of colour. So books that you might not otherwise find. So our current June book is actually Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin and Celebration of Pride. Next month we're doing Journey by Moonlight by Antel Serb, translated by Len Ricks.
And people will have read those books before they come on the walk.
Yes, they must read them before coming on the walk. I'm very strict about that.
Right, now tell us about the new initiative.
Yes, well, so having spent my life in books. 2 years ago, almost exactly, I started volunteering at my local food bank. At the time, the phrase "heat or eat" was very much around. I was very concerned about food poverty and injustice, and wanted to try and help out locally. And entering the food bank, having come from the world of books and knowing how much inspiration and connection books can bring, I immediately thought the food bank can gain something here from books, from this power of books. How can we bring books in and see what happens? So I was volunteering for a while. I talked to the people who ran the food bank. They were very keen to give it a go and see if we could try and counter kind of literacy poverty alongside food poverty and build that community. So I sourced books locally. It took surprisingly little time to gather over 300 books. And then it must have been, I think it was September when I did the first one. I just opened up a trestle table, sort of spread out the books, and the effect was extraordinary. Everybody kind of flocked around the table, picking up the books, chatting about them, talking about the ones they read, the ones they didn't like, the ones they were furious that I didn't have. And as well as these conversations about the books, what became clear was that these conversations were going on into new directions. So a book about London, Peter Ackroyd's book about London, somebody picked up and was talking about, and they then used that as an opportunity to kind of talk about their own life in London and their own personal stories. Recipe books, everybody wanted to share their own way of cooking something that was different to the book. So conversations just bloomed, and that one day we gave out over 50 books, which was actually more than one per person who was accessing the food bank that day. So I instantly saw something had happened, and I wanted to pursue that and see how we could harness that.
Yeah, and so clearly you've been doing it ever since.
Been doing it ever since, sort of going back every week with more books, setting up the trestle table. I set up the charity, which is not a straightforward process.
No.
And but really important to, in our board of trustees, really getting experts in. So a lawyer, an accountant, a child and adolescent psychotherapist who's got a really strong understanding of the mental health side, somebody who's worked with charities, somebody who's worked with books, to try and gather their expertise. But moreover, as I've been keeping on doing it, I've been really paying attention to what the people who use the book bank stalls want and how we can best support them. So really listening and responding, just so that as we become a charity and work out what we're doing the right thing for them, not just the right thing that I think.
And what is it? What's the feedback?
So the feedback, well, so the book bank stall is it's not a little free library. Crucially, the book bank stall is staffed by a volunteer, and that volunteer comes from the book industry. So whether that's a writer or a publisher or a journalist who writes about books or a retired librarian, so they bring their passion and expertise for books into the book bank, and so we train them up, giving them support and safeguarding and such kind of listening skills and things, so that the book bank becomes a space for conversation and a space for something different that isn't just the transactional nature of a food bank. And the response has been really positive. We have sort of quarterly focus groups which our chair hosts, where things come up that are quite unexpected. So often people say, when I talk about book banks, well, what about libraries? Surely that's fulfilling that need. Yeah. I mean, firstly, book banks is about book ownership rather than just borrowing. Secondly, it removes a lot of the barriers that are there for libraries, such as opening hours or needing to have a fixed address and able to get a library card. But one thing that really surprised me in the focus group that came out was that our book bank's guests really felt that we had a better selection of books than the library, which frankly isn't true, because we don't have anywhere like as many books. But the fact that every week it's a different selection, and that's always changing, and that I remember people's tastes. So I'll say, there's one particular man who absolutely loves literary fiction, and he's always coming in and telling me about Olivia Lang or Lawrence Durrell, and we just got a donation of the new Colm Tóibín book. So I could say, we've got this in. He was like, oh my goodness, it's so exciting. He instantly grabbed it. So this feeling that it's there for them, and there's that engagement, which I think you don't always get in a library.
Yeah. And kids?
Yeah, interesting question. So we do have a lot of kids' books, but not that many people bring their children to food banks, partly because of the times they're opening. I think also partly because of the stigma around food bank usage still, which we're hoping to counter. But yes, people do come and take books for their children.
Yeah.
There's one particular man I'm thinking of who always gets a handful to read at bedtime. There's another one who really talked quite movingly to me about the time he spent with his son after school, and how the books became quite a good bridge between his life and his son's life. His son had just started reception, and he'd say, oh, Dad, we've got that book at reception, and they'd read it together. So it really was a way of using books to bring so much together.
Fascinating, and what a great initiative. Emily, you're having an official launch on the evening of Wednesday the 12th.
Yes, we are. We're launching into the... And I mean, it's slightly confusing because we have been going for a while, but I think it marks the end of our kind of pilot stage. We've just trained our first 10 volunteers. We're opening our second site in Norfolk at the Wyndham Community Outreach Project. And we're currently fundraising to open our third site, partnering with the Hammersmith and Fulham Food Bank. So we're really at the stage where it's not just me and the trestle table. It's a team of volunteers, and we're working with more and more communities.
Excellent. How can people find out more?
Yes, so it's bookbanks.co.uk, or follow us on Instagram, which is at bookbanksuk.
Emily Rhodes, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for having me on.
Now, Wednesday the 12th, very exciting day for literature. Not only are we seeing the launch of the Bookbanks, but it's also a huge day for the Women's Prize. And joining me now on the line is the author and founder director of the Women's Prize, Kate Mosse. Hello to you, Kate.
Good morning.
Kate, this is very exciting. We know that the Women's Prizes this time for non-fiction as well as for fiction will be announced on the 13th. But you've got a wonderful full day of events on the Wednesday. Tell us more.
Yes, absolutely. And it was lovely to hear the interview about Bookbanks. It's such a brilliant initiative, and the Women's Prize are doing some work with them too. So all credit to Emily and her team. It's such a great idea. So what we're doing on the 12th is that it's called Women's Prize Live, and we are opening up Bedford Square Gardens to the readers and putting on a whole day's festival, if you like. And it will kick off with a live recording of our kind of award-winning podcast hosted by Vic Hope, and she will be interviewing the wonderful Julia Gillard, who was the former Prime Minister of Australia, and of course who struck a blow for women everywhere when she made her very important comments about women not being talked over and all of those kind of things. And during the course of the day, there will be panel discussions. There'll be panel about how to get published, how to get an agent. There'll be things on crime, about, all sorts of fiction and, of course, non-fiction. And then we'll finish off the afternoon with me interviewing the one and only Helen Fielding, creator of Bridget Jones. And then in the evening, we have all 6 shortlistees for the Women's Prize for Non-Fiction reading live, chaired by the chair of the judges, Professor Susanna Lipscomb, and then 5 of the 6 shortlistees for the Fiction Prize, chaired by their chair, Monica Ali, and we will have Kate Grenville, who is a previous Women's Prize winner, on the line from Australia. So it's a jam-packed day that will be 12 hours of talking about brilliant books, brilliant women, men and women, everybody coming into the garden just to share the joy of reading.
Fantastic. Now, talking about brilliant books, you have a new novel out, The Ghost Ship.
I do. Well, it came out last year, but it's out in paperback.
And it's a Sunday Times #1 bestseller.
It was, and it's so joyous because this novel published out into COVID, and so never really saw it in the shop. It's never real, in a way. The Ghost Ship is the story of lady pirates, as the Daily Mail insisted on calling it. And it's an adventure story. It's on the high seas, and people loved it when it came out. And I'm really excited for it coming out on the 20th of June in paperback, because, of course, the paperback is so affordable. It's much more accessible for many readers, particularly younger readers, particularly people who want to go on holiday and pack something in their suitcase. So I'm very much hoping that people will take my Lady Pirates to their hearts. It's a great adventure story, a great beach read, and it'd be lovely to see it right back up at the top of the charts again. I've got a lot of stiff competition. So if everybody listening goes and pre-orders a book now, then we can all set to the high seas together and be
of course,
pirates.
Part of your competition will be whoever wins the Women's Prize.
Of course, absolutely. I mean, that's happening on the 13th. And we will be announcing both the 29th winner of the Women's Prize for Fiction and the very first winner of the Women's Prize for Non-Fiction. And obviously, I have read all of the books. I have interviewed all of the authors. And there's not, every single one of them is a worthy winner. So I don't envy my judges who have the job of deciding who is going to take the crown both these years. But it's going to be so wonderful. And it has been a celebration of readers as well as writers. And what has been great is to see the shortlisted authors on both the prizes getting to know each other and reading each other's books and talking to each other and about each other. And that is what the Women's Prize was set up to do, to celebrate and to amplify women's voices for the benefit of all readers, whoever they are, wherever they are. And it's fun. Reading should be fun and joyous.
Absolutely. And so this big day, men can come to that, right?
Of course. The thing is, it's like, I really love football. And now I'm delighted to say that women's football is right back on the map where it used to be in the 1920s and the 1910s. It's back on the map. But before that, I always watched men's football. So the point is that these are brilliant books written by women for everybody. And there are lots of men who love reading books by women and love reading books by men. The only thing we have found, we did some big piece of research recently, and what we discovered is that there is still a gender reading gap, which means that women read books by women and men. And a lot of the time, men don't think books by women are for them. But of course, the truth is all novels and all non-fiction are about empathy. They're about understanding. And so the more widely we read, the more we stand in other people's shoes, the better, truthfully, the world will be. So what we need, of course, every single gorgeous, wonderful man, however old they are, wherever they come from, is very welcome. And 12th is for all readers. And we'll see you there in the garden, and we'll pray for no rain.
Excellent. Kate Mosse, thank you very much indeed. And of course, you can find out more information about that event on the Women's Prize for Fiction and Non-Fiction, the Women's Prizes website. And that's all for today's edition of Monocle on Saturday. Many thanks to our producer and studio engineer, Mariella Bevan, to my guests, Lijia Zhang, Kate Mosse and Emily Rhodes. And Monocle on Saturday will return at the same time next weekend. I'm Georgina Godwin. Thank you for listening.